Hello, and welcome to Conquering Finale. My name is Jason Lafredo, and we are dealing with repeats Redux again today. We're starting in with the text repeats in Finale. That's the things like DSL Coda, Fine, to Coda, like those sort of markings. And so let's get into that. We'll go into the repeat tool here. And there's a couple ways to do this. With the repeat tool, you get your little arrow here. And if you just double click above a measure, you'll get this repeat selection dialog box, which we've looked at before pertaining to the graphic repeats. We've talked about all of these things, but today we're going to talk about the bottom half with the text repeats. And you'll see that you have a list of them to choose from. So just select one of them and press select. We'll get this text repeat assignment dialog box, which I will get to very shortly, and click OK, and you'll see that it will add that marking. Now, there's another way to add these. Instead of double clicking, we can just select the measure we want, press the return key, and we'll get that repeat selection dialog box, and we can choose it from there again. Now, there's a big difference between doing it in both of these ways, and let me show you exactly what that is. You saw when I did that, I selected the measure, pressed return, and selected it. And what it did is that it lined up the text repeat with the right bar line, which is probably what you want. When you double click to add one, it will align it to exactly where the arrow is when you double click. So if I actually double click inside the measure and choose that one, you'll see that marking appear inside the measure, which is not ideal. So I do think it's a better solution to select the measure and press return and choose one. The other thing is that the alignment, we can start talking about this assignment dialog box a little bit. The positioning here, we have these horizontal and vertical offset values. Now, in this case, you see the horizontal is set to 0, which is what's aligning it to the right bar line, and the vertical offset of 0.25, which, by the way, you can't change anywhere in Finale. This default setting will be 0.25 no matter what. This is what's telling Finale to line that text repeat up with the right bar line. Now, different repeat items here are aligned, are either right justified or left justified. So most of these word markings are actually right justified, but these graphic markings, the Coda sign and the Senyo sign, are actually left justified. So if we choose the Senyo sign here, you'll see that it still says horizontal offset 0, but it's actually offset from the left edge because the marking itself, you can see the handle is now on the left side of the marking, not the right side, like the other ones are. So if we go back here to the DCL Fine, you'll see that, again, horizontal offset 0, and it's aligned to the right side because the handle is right there, right? So that's just how that works. Now, you can always change these horizontal and vertical offsets to whatever you need them to, but this is how they will start off if you just press return to add a text repeat like that. Now, there's this allow individual edits per staff option, and I'll get into this, I think, in a couple videos when I talk about the positioning of them when it relates to having multiple markings on a score. Same with the show on. We'll talk about that a little bit later. But that's just the horizontal and the vertical offsets. Now, there's one other way to add these text repeats. You may have noticed in the list here, on the right-hand side, there's these numbers in parentheses, 1 through 5, and then some letters F, C, S, and G. These are metatools, and we can, this works sort of the same way as other metatools in Finale. If you hold down that key and single click in near the measure, you will get that. So if I hold down the 1 and single click, we'll get this text repeat assignment dialog box, and it will add that first marking, which was DC Alfine. Now, when you do it this way, it does behave the same way as if you had double clicked, so it will put the handle wherever you clicked. So I don't particularly care for this because I think it's better to have it automatically aligned with whichever bar line it needs to, either the right or the left. So I think it's much better to select the measure, press return, and then choose the one that you want. And of course, metatools work the same way with these text repeats. If you hold, shift and press any key, it will, pull up this thing. And if I were to do this, I could change the DCL Fine to, I think I just pressed H, Shift H. So if I press select now, I'm just reassigning the H key to this DCL Fine. I guess this can be important if you start adding other ones. Again, I don't find the metatools particularly useful for the repeat tool because of that positioning situation. So it's for me, it's not really worth dealing with it anyway. So let's start talking about what's in that text repeat assignment dialog box. Because the action and the target is really what's important. As I mentioned, the show on, I'll deal with that in another video. But there's several actions here, and by default, the always jump action will be selected. Now, this will be handy for certain markings, but not for others. Now, I happen to pick the Senyo sign here, so the Senyo is just a mark. It's never going to make the playback jump anywhere. So for something like the Senyo, you definitely want to choose the never jump mark. And when you do that, the target options get grayed out, so you can see the difference between always jump and never jump, right? The always jump is telling Finale to, when you get to that marking, to always jump to whatever you have set for the target, right? So this is going to be handy for things like DSL codas, because if you think about it, when you get to that DSL coda, you're always going to want to jump to the DS. You'll never actually get to that marking again, or I suppose you could if you have some complicated things set up. But chances are you're only going to get to it once. It's going to go back to the DS, and somewhere before you get to that marking again, it's going to get interrupted by either a to coda or a fine sign. So you actually will never get to that. Otherwise, you would create an sort of infinite loop, which you may not want. The jump on pass or passes option. So this is what you're going to use for something like a to coda marking. If you think about it, you've got a DS, it goes back to here, you get to the to coda marking, and then it jumps to the to coda. So you're only going to want that to jump the second time through. So chances are for a to coda marking, you're going to want to set it to jump on pass number 2, right? Because if you have it jump on pass number 1, you're going to get to, if it's in bar 8, you're going to get to bar 8, and it's going to jump to bar 17 without ever playing 9 through 16, which would not be what you wanted, right? Now, this can be other things, too. This could be 3, it could be 4, depending on if you have some complicated, repeat structures going on. You can use this to your advantage. And you see that it says pass or pass is. So we could actually do 2 to 3, and this would indicate that on the second and third pass, we're going to jump to whatever the target is. Again, this is useful sometimes in very complex repeat structures, but again, more often than not, if you just have a simple to coda marking, just jump on pass 2 is going to be perfectly fine. Now, the play selection 2 times, reset on repeat action, you can use these for text repeat assignments, but this is more relevant to the graphic repeats. Like I think I mentioned this in the very first video we talked about. You can have a repeated section, repeat 4 times, in which case you'd make this 4 instead of 2. It's possible to do that with text repeats, but it's not quite as relevant. So, but it's there if you needed it. And then the stop on pass, obviously, will do just that. On the second time through, it will stop. So this is what you're going to use for fine markings, right? And you can see that, again, the target gets grayed out, just like the never jump, because the stopping is actually not making a jump. It's doing something else. It's stopping. So for a fine marking, you'd want it to stop on pass 2, unless there's some other, again, if there's some other complex things in there, if it's in the middle of a repeat, maybe it's stop on pass 3 or 4 or 5 or something. So some of this stuff you do have to kind of calculate out sometimes with these complicated repeat structures. And then the jump if ignoring repeats. Now, this has to do with an option in the playback. So if we go to the playback thing here, playback record options, there's an option here for repeats to ignore repeats, and this will only apply to playing back, obviously. And sometimes it's handy to have this checked if you're just proofreading and you don't want to listen to your piece 4 times through if you have a lot of repeats going on. So just check that and it will ignore the repeats. However, sometimes it's handy to have the marking jump anyway. Again, this is kind of more relevant with endings because you wouldn't want to play a first and second ending back to back. So you might have it jump anyway in the first ending. So, again, it's a little bit more relevant to different types of repeats, but it is available in the text repeats as well. And then let's talk about the target. So with all of these options that have to do with jumping, so that's the always jump, jump on pass, play selection, those three options will need to jump to a target. So you sort of need to tell Finale, where do you want me to jump to? Always jump. Now there's a few options here. We have measure number. Now if the measure number is set to 0, nothing happens. So actually never jump and always jump to measure 0 is actually sort of the same thing. But for like a DCL Coda, what you'd want to do is an always jump to measure 1, right? And that will take you back to the beginning of the piece. Now, what's important to realize is that these measure numbers that you enter here are the defined measure numbers in the piece. So if you're familiar with measure number regions, you know, if you have skipped bars or A and B bars or whatever, and you need to go back to a specific bar in the middle of one of those, you have to type it in exactly. So if your target is like measure, 4B, you have to type 4B in order for it to get back to that measure. And we have this option here to auto update target, which is handy with the measure number setting, because if you set it to bar 3, for example, and then you go and make some changes and you end up adding 2 bars before bar 3, having it go back to bar 3 would be the wrong place. So with this auto update target, it's going to move this target for you. So if you add 2 bars here, then you come back to this text repeat assignment, and this will actually say bar 5 now. And it works the same way if you change the measure number regions too. So if all of a sudden you've decided this piece has to start with bar 4, then this would actually update to measure 6, I think. So there is some value in using the auto update target, particularly when you're using the measure number option here. So let's talk about the text repeat ID target thing. Now, what's important to understand is that every single one of these text repeats gets an ID, and the ID is actually the number within this list that it exists. So DCL Fine is ID 1, DCL Coda is ID 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, and 8, and 9. So the Senyu sign, for example, has a text ID of 8. And if you select that, you'll see in the text repeat assignment that you're dealing with text repeat ID number 8, right? So where this comes in handy, actually, let me just do this. So let's put this Senyu sign here. Now this is a marking, so just, never mark, or never jump, it's a mark, okay? Now, if we go down to bar 16 here and we put a DSL Coda and select that, now this is going to be an always jump because it's a DS, and again, it will never get to that more than once anyway, so we want to use always jump. And we choose target text repeat ID. What we want to do is choose text repeat ID number 8. And that will tell Finale that when it gets to this DSL Coda, it's going to jump to wherever this text repeat ID is. Now, this is sort of handy because if you happen to change where this goes, so if you delete that and add it back in bar 3, Finale is still going to find, oops, that was the wrong one, but Finale is still going to find that that Senyu sign, because it's actually going, the target is the repeat ID, which is number 8, which is this one. So wherever this is, it's going to go to that. So that's kind of handy to do. And oh, and also, by the way, sorry, I'll go back here. Wherever they are in this list, that's the number. And actually, if you change the order, then the text ID changes as well. So if I were to move this Senyu sign up here, then this Senyu sign is actually ID number 7, and then your DSL Coda is not going to be able to find it because it's in the wrong ID position. So it is kind of important that once you start using these, to keep these in order. I will show you in the next video how to sort of edit these and create some new ones and all kinds of stuff. So as you're doing that, it's kind of important to, kind of keep everything in order, or else it won't really work that well. And then aside from the text repeat ID and the measure numbers, we do have backwards and forwards options. Again, a little bit, this is sort of handy in limited circumstances. More often than not, you're going to want to jump to a measure number or a text repeat ID, but in some cases, we can choose to jump backwards a specific number of bars. It just depends on how your repeat structure is laid out and whether or not this is actually handy to do or not. But the way this works is that backwards 0 bars will actually go back to the beginning of the bar. So if we're going to this highlighted bar 5 here, hits the end of the bar, backwards 0 bars goes back to the beginning of the bar, so it's going back 1 bar, I guess. Backwards 1 measure would take you to the previous bar, which is actually repeating 2 measures, so a little bit semantic there, but that's how that works. Forward is even a little bit stranger, sort of, because, forward, if you enter a value of 0 here, forward 0 bars takes you back to the beginning of the bar, so you're not actually going forward at all, which is strange. And if you choose 1, forward 1 measure, you're not skipping any measures, you're just going to the next measure. So very, very semantic. In order to skip a bar, you'd actually have to select 2, forward 2 measures. So that's how the forward and backwards works for the target. All right, so that's sort of the idea behind this text repeat assignment dialog box, particularly when it pertains to the action and target. That's sort of the important part of all of this, so hopefully this makes a little bit more sense. And let me actually just kind of set something up just so you can kind of see how this works a little bit. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to create a kind of simple DSL Coda structure for you to see how this works. So we're in bar 5. I'm going to create my Senyo sign here, and again, this is just a mark. So we're not going to deal with that. And remember, we have to remember the ID is number 8, right? In bar 16, I'm going to put a DSL Coda. And we're going to always jump, right? Because it's a DS, so we always want to jump. And we're going to go back to text ID number 8, right? So we'll do that and click OK. All right, so now we're going to get to the DSL Coda, and it's going to go back to there. In the next bar, we're going to do a Coda symbol here, and this one we just want to have a never jump mark because it's just a mark, right? And again, remember the text ID, it's number 7 this time, so click OK. And then at bar 8 we're going to put the to Coda sign. Now there's something kind of special about this to Coda text repeat thing here, which I'm going to get into the next video. It does have a hashtag, but what it's doing is it's actually replacing the hashtag with the symbol that exists at the target. So when we select this and we're going to go to target ID 7, not only is it going to jump, and again we're going to want to jump on the second pass, remember, because this is a to Coda. Not only is it going to jump to this text ID number 7, it's also going to replace that hashtag symbol. I keep calling it a hashtag symbol, but it's the pound sign, the pound sign symbol with that whatever marking is at the target ID, which is the Coda marking. So when we do that, we'll get a marking that looks like to Coda with the Coda marking in it. And if I did this right, I should play it back, and it should play the structure correctly. And when it gets to 16, it'll go back to 5. There it is. And now it will jump to 17. Yep. So that's sort of how that works. And let me just set up one other simple thing here so you can see how this works as well. Let's put in bar 8. Let's do a DC Alfine. So we'll select the DC Alfine. Now with the DC, we do want to use the measure number. If you put 0, nothing's going to happen. It's just going to keep going. So we do have to enter the actual first measure. So measure number 1 here for the DC, always jump. That's great. And then in bar 4, we're actually going to put the Fine sign. And for the Fine, we're going to do the stop on pass 2, right? Because we don't want it to stop the first time it gets to bar 4. We want it to stop the second time. And click OK. And I think I set that up right, so let's see if we can play that. It should just play 1 through 8 and then 1 through 4. And then it'll stop, just like that. All right, so that's kind of a basics of how you work the text repeats in Finale. So, and I just put intermediate here, but it actually should say basic, so sorry about that. So yeah, so that's all there is to it. Come back for the next video. We're going to talk a little bit more about that text repeat designer, and I'll show you how to create new ones and do all kinds of stuff with that. So all right, so thanks for watching. I appreciate it, and I will see you soon on the next video.